Chapter 30. The beginning of the fight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Minos and his group saw 4 people approaching their group with smiles on their faces, they soon understood that these were their prey, which they had so prepared for. They're finally here, they thought to themselves. Almost immediately after seeing the arrival of these people, the group of Minos began to put on an expression of confusion, as if they did not know what was happening. One of the soldiers, who was calmly eating a skewer with meat, took the initiative and carefully asked who these people were. He had an expression that would make anyone feel sorry, that you could even see that he was shitting himself with fear. What a great actor! Thought Minos and the other 9 people, who knew what was going on. While Minos' forces were trying to do their best, Daryl and his 3 protectors were very happy with the image in front of them. That's right. You must be afraid of us. Hee hee. One of the protectors thought while holding on to laughter. The other 2 protectors were also very happy with this. They let their guard down so much that they didn't realize that these enemies, who should have been blurring at this very moment, were already at level 40. In fact, in the spiritual world, from the 5th stage of cultivation, you can feel the energy around you. As long as there is no big difference in cultivation, you will also be able to ascertain someone's level within a certain distance. However, this is not something automatic that one person would feel as soon as he saw another. To be able to distinguish someone's strength, first, the other cultivator would have to be some distance from you. This perimeter depends exclusively on his level. That is, the stronger someone is, the greater the distance in which he can feel the spiritual energy. Second, if the previous condition were met, you would still have to try to discover the strength of that other cultivator on your own. That is, if someone did not take the initiative, then this person would not be able to find out that person's level of cultivation. This almost automatic sense would only appear when someone reached level 70 because, from this level, the person's soul is strong enough and can realize the sense of the soul, which is able to feel the power of the person's soul and not the spiritual power. Of course, spiritual power and soul power are equivalent. The difference is that the soul's sense can feel the surroundings as if it were a person's unconscious reaction, just like breathing in ordinary people. For example, a normal, healthy person does not need to think about breathing. His own body simply does it on its own. The same is true for the soul's sense. A cultivator who is at least in the spiritual saint stage immediately knows the level of someone who has entered within the range of his soul's reach. Of course, during a fight, all this would be left aside because with the spiritual energy being released by techniques, anyone could feel the level of the opponent. That way, Daryl's protectors didn't bother to probe their enemies, as this was a very easy job. That's why they didn't notice something so easy to discover. Then the soldier, who had a look of fear on his face, asked it out loud. Who are you? What are you doing here? Kakik, do you want to know who we are? One of the protectors, who was at level 41, asked with a contemptuous smile on his face. Ha ha ha, Quent, don't spend too much time scaring these idiots, said Protector Philip, with a calm look on his face. You worms have offended someone that you couldn't. He, don't you remember what happened in Maritime City? Don't tell me that you are so naive that you didn't know that you would be persecuted for that, said the last protector, who was at level 42. He had a grotesque expression on his face while he had one hand ready to draw his sword. At this moment, Daryl Silva finally took a step forward and said it majestically. TSK, I will give you a chance. Give me the sword of grade .2, low level, and I will be able to give you a painless death. Minos then feigned a voice full of fear and then said. Are you the young master of the Silva family? As someone from such a strong family, how can you act like a filthy thief? Ha ha ha, filthy thief. You can think what you want, naive boy. This is the world of the strong, and as you dared to have something you cannot protect, then you will die for it. Daryl said contemptuously before spitting in the direction of Minos. When he heard that, Minos appeared to be completely terrified. He then asked. Since you're going to kill us, can you answer a question for me? Daryl looked back at Minus and was satisfied. It seems that he has already accepted his destiny, he. Okay, as I'm a merciful person, I'll give you a chance to have one of your questions answered. I want to know if your family was involved in my father's death, Minus said shyly and weakly. When young Daryl heard this, he burst out laughing because he really knew about it since his father had been the mastermind. Ha ha ha, so is this what you wanted to know? Okay, you don't have to wait to get to hell and find out from your dad, he. My father was the mastermind of that ambush, ha ha ha, satisfied. After hearing this, Minus changed his attitude completely. Now he knew where to get his revenge. Even though it was still a few years away, having this information now would make things easier for him in the future. He then revealed a smile on his face and gave the signal for his men to prepare. After that, Minus activated the spiritual array he had previously prepared. When Daryl's group saw this, they finally realized that something was wrong with this situation. From Minus' reaction, it looked like he was just waiting for that information to fight. That was when, at that moment, one of the three carried out a probe on the strength of these 11 people in front of them. When he felt the cultivation level of each one, he immediately had a pale expression on his face. After all, even though it was very easy to deal with 10 people at level 39, but it was completely different if those people were already at level 40. Given the numbers on both sides, this would be a life and death struggle. At that point, he tried to warn the group by shouting, but it was too late. This is a trap. Then, the spiritual array was successfully activated, and a buzzing sound was heard. Zum. Shit. A fucking spiritual array. Activate the defensive spiritual array in the young master. Protector Philip said with an ugly expression on his face. If something happened to Daryl, they would not escape death, even if they left this place alive. With the level of cultivation of the three protectors, they would have their speed reduced at most, but Daryl. He would be completely helpless for a few seconds. That was enough for him to be killed. Thus, one of them quickly activated a defensive array around Daryl, who was already unconscious at the time, while the other two were on guard. At the same time, Minus and his group, who were not under the effects of the array since they had taken preventive measures, began to attack the enemy side. Wind Palm. Demon Court. Hammering the World. Dragon Breath. Minus soldiers released their attack techniques at about the same time. Meanwhile, the young Stuart activated two of his techniques. Devouring Art. Spatial Sword. When they saw all these attacks coming, the two guards on guard went deathly pale. Disgrace. These guys are much stronger than they look. Philip said as he looked shocked. Quent, if you take longer, we'll run out. Said the other protector, who was already using everything he could to defend himself. Philip, prepare for withdrawal. If we go to fight, we cannot guarantee the safety of the young master. As long as we get out of this damn place, there will be a chance for revenge in the future. The other protector said, but at that moment, he noticed something. Do you think I don't want to run? But these bastards have already cornered us at this waterfall. We can only fight for our lives now. At this point, the other two protectors finally realized that they were slowly being pushed into the waterfall. Shit. The two thought about it when they saw the waterfall over 50 meters not far from them. One of them looked at Minus' side and said to the other two protectors with a fearful expression. That Brad is already at level 33. How did he achieve this? Not only that, his attacks are as strong as those of these other guys. Chapter 31. End of fight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sergeant Pike and two more soldiers are going to hold this guy at level 43. Sergeant Nito and two other soldiers are going to hold this one at level 42. I'm going to support the groups of you two. As for the rest, kill this one at level 41 quickly and return to help us deal with the rest, Minus said decisively. He was not a benevolent person. With the experiences that Minos had received from Henricus Longus, he knew very well how problematic a simple situation could become if someone was not willing to root out a problem. That way, since Daryl's group came to kill and steal them, then they could only expect the same from Minos. Damn it! The protector of the Silva family, who had the least strength in the group, cursed Minos when he heard such a thing. Brat, aren't you going too far? You don't think the Silva family will make it cheap if you kill us, do you? Philip asked with a serious expression on his face. He wanted to appeal to anything that could save their lives. Otherwise. While he heard this, Minos group entered the formation ordered earlier while focusing their attacks on each of the protectors. Minos then replied with a smile on his face. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I release you, then I would only have to flee, at the risk of being killed by the Silva family at any time. But if I kill you, maybe this family will take years to find out. There's not much to think about, huh? Minos then released another sword attack in Philip's direction. Spatial sword. Of course, with the difference in strength between the two parties, Minos would not be able to prevent Philip from moving. And he was barely slowing down with the spatial sword technique. After all, there was a difference of 10 levels between the two of them. However, at the same time that Minos attacked, 3 other level 40 soldiers were doing the same, launching their attack techniques on the protector Philip. Hell! Philip activated his defense as much as he could while trying to dodge attacks. Meanwhile, the weaker protector was increasingly at a disadvantage when facing 4 soldiers at the same time. It wouldn't be long before he fell. Boom! But before that, the young Daryl finally recovered from the stunning effect of the spiritual array that Minos had previously prepared. He could see a series of lights and hear a loud noise in his surroundings. Damn it, what happened? Daryl asked himself while feeling great discomfort in his vision. He recovered quickly since his subordinates had set up a defensive array as soon as they were ambushed. This lessened the stunning effects and was also protecting the young Master Silva from the fight that was taking place right in front of him. At this point, Daryl was seeing many attacks being launched on the 3 men in front of him. He could see a lot of light effects and explosions going on around him. Boom! Daryl then looked up and saw a large black circumference, looking like a ring, with a fog of the same color on the inside. He then felt discomfort when his defensive array started to crack. Crack! However, before his defense was destroyed, Daryl saw a deeply shocking scene. At that time, Protector Bayo, the one at level 41, was being brutally murdered. Damn it! I can't take it anymore. Bayo thought to himself when he felt that his defense would collapse at any moment. Wind Palm. One of Minos' soldiers activated his attack technique, releasing a large wind blast in the direction of Bayo. Tum! A noise was heard and the wind palm technique collided with Bayo's defenses. Crack! However, this time Bayo was unable to defend himself. Shortly thereafter, his body was thrown away, while his chest part was completely sunk in his own body. He had died. Daryl saw this with terrified eyes. He couldn't believe this nightmare that was happening in front of him. How did this happen? Guard Bayo just died. Damn it! Bayo fell, and now we will be next. Quent thought as a trickle of blood could be seen coming out of his mouth. Sergeant Pike then shouted at the remaining 4 soldiers. 2 of you come to my group, while the other 2 attack this level 42 guy. As the struggles of the 2 protectors continued, the defensive spiritual array that protected Daryl finally collapsed. Crack! Daryl thought to himself as he saw this. I have to run. Otherwise, we will all die. If I escape, at least I can get revenge in the future. However, as he prepared to flee, Minos slowly appeared in front of him. Oh. So, now you want to get away? Huh, don't even think about it since you came, so forget to leave. After saying this, Minos activated his attack technique while absorbing the young Daryl's energy. Spatial sword. Damn, this wretch is draining my energy. Daryl tried to release his defense technique, but shortly after Minus activated his own technique, the surrounding space within a radius of 40 meters was frozen. At the same time, Daryl had his speed reduced to a large extent. Shit. Why is my spiritual energy moving so slowly? Daryl thought to himself. But shortly thereafter, a blade of energy was hurled at the young Master Silva's neck. You can't kill me, I am. Vup. Daryl could not resist the attack, and his head was separated from his body. He could almost see for a split second, his headless body falling slowly. He had died. The headless corpse fell to the ground as blood poured down young Daryl's neck. His head could be seen rolling on the floor, while he had a terrified look in his eyes. At the same time, the two protectors caught a glimpse of this scene and were even more fearful. There was practically no resistance from Daryl while Minus killed him. The difference in strength was just too big. With such talent, it would not be long before Minus took revenge on the Silva family for his father's death. Shortly thereafter, the disadvantage of the remaining two protectors grew even more, with Quent being almost depleted of spiritual energy. A group of 5 people then launched their final attacks in the direction of Quent. Hammering the World. Demon Court. Blood Sword. Smashing the Air. Iron Fists. Whoosh. Boom. Many noises were heard when Quent's defenses were completely shattered. A cry of pain was heard when Quent's nearly dead body fell to the floor. Shit. Since this is the case, I can just take some of you with me. Philip said as he began to condense all of his remaining spiritual energy into a ball of black energy. In a single instant, all the vitality of a spiritual general, who was just over 800 years old, was sucked into the energy ball. At the same time, Philip's appearance changed completely until he was like an older man, full of white hair, completely malnourished, and as white as a sheet of paper. Get away and release all your remaining spiritual energy in your defense techniques. Minus said in a concerned voice as he looked at the sacrifice of Protector Philip. This guy is really decisive. Sergeant Pike thought about it as he walked away. In fact, in the spiritual world, any person could sacrifice themselves in a time of desperation, as long as they were cultivators, of course. But not everyone had such tenacity, as this was a process that could be considered worse than dying from enemy attacks. It was said that the very soul of the individual who sacrificed himself would be used as an oxidizer for the explosion. This caused pain that could be considered thousands of times worse than the pain caused by physical wounds. For this reason, even though there was the possibility of sacrificing themselves to harm their enemies, the vast majority of cultivators did not have the courage to do such a thing. These were the cases of the 2 previously killed protectors. As for young Daryl, well, he didn't even have time to think about doing this. That was another requirement, the cultivator who was going to sacrifice needed a certain amount of time to do that. And since Protector Philip had the highest level of cultivation, he was able to fulfill this requirement. Indestructible body. Impenetrable shield. Steel skin. Air defense. Many defensive techniques were activated at the same time. One could see many pale expressions among Minus soldiers, who tried to protect themselves with every drop of energy contained in their bodies. And even though Protector Philip was almost drained of spiritual energy, sacrifice also burns the cultivator's vitality and soul strength. And even if it wasn't as strong as someone's spiritual power at level 43, everyone except Minus was already exhausted. Therefore, such a thing was still quite fearful for everyone who was close to Philip. Boom. Screams of pain were heard from the soldiers. A big explosion happened, and then rocks started to fly all over that part of the waterfall. A small crater more than 10 meters in radius was also formed on the ground. Soon afterward, 5 people could still be seen standing, while another 6 were lying on the floor. Nobody knew if they were alive or dead. Chapter 32. Rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zoom. Ow. Hell, I thought I was going to die. Thought one of the soldiers to himself while a trickle of blood dripped from his left ear. He could hear a humming sound while he had a feeling of imbalance and blurred vision. Lathar. Lathar. Hey, look here. Screamed one of the soldiers, who had fewer injuries, to a teammate who was lying on the floor with a stunning look and blood running out of his mouth and ears. Hey man, are you okay? The soldier asked as he looked at Lathar. Cough, cough. Ah. I'm fine, Callus. I just need some time to recover from the shock. Lathar said in a weak voice and a pale face. After that, the same thing was happening with the other soldiers of Minos. Half of them were fighting Protector Philip just before the sacrifice, so they were more exposed to what happened. Of the group of 11 people, 5 were completely exhausted, but with few injuries. Minos was one of them. The rest suffered internal injuries, but nothing too serious. They would only need to rest for a few days and would be fully recovered. That guy really scared me a little bit. Even though he was exhausted, he could still do all this damage to us. Said Pike with a narrow look in his eyes. He had been one of the most injured in the group and was shocked by what had happened. It was really awful. I hope I will not encounter this type of enemy in the future. Minos thought to himself. Even his defense technique, indestructible body, was unable to withstand the damage caused by the explosion that happened, to the point that several bruises could be seen on his body through his torn clothes. All of you, rest as much as you can. We will stay here until tomorrow. After that, we will return to the city of Portland. I will also give you the due rewards for this fight later. Minos spoke aloud to all the soldiers. After hearing this, all 10 people were happy to know that they would have time to rest and still receive rewards. At that moment, while Minos soldiers were gradually recovering, the young Stuart started walking towards the bodies of the 3 people who had been killed previously. He first went to the young Daryl's headless body, which was a few feet away from the crater that had formed there. When Minos looked closely, he saw a silver ring on one of the fingers on Daryl's right hand. It was his spatial ring. There were several types of spatial rings in this world, but the main difference between them was the storage volume that each could provide. However, even rings with lower capacities could be considered rare items in this region of the central continent. Generally, in addition to the children of the great noble families in the region, having such belonging was only commonly seen in cultivators of the 5th stage of cultivation, general spiritual, or above that. That's because these rings were not cheap for those of a lower level. However, it was not so common to see people who have just entered this phase of cultivation having such an item, and many of these cultivators took years to be able to buy one. Anyway, Minos searched the remaining 2 bodies, but there was no spatial ring. TSK, as expected. These 2 are just subordinates to the Silva family and were only at levels 41 and 42. Minos thought to himself as he searched them. There were only bags with a few dozen of low-grade crystals, nothing that caught his eye. He then walked to the crater that had been formed by Philip's sacrifice and started looking for remnants. This is because even low-level rings had excellent resistance and would not be destroyed in an explosion like the one that occurred here. Minos then saw something shining close to the waterfall. It was a spatial ring. Oh, what a good surprise. It is no wonder that he seemed to be the leader of the group. After collecting the 2 rings that were without owners, Minos sat on a rock next to the waterfall and began to search the rings. This was not a difficult thing to do, as the rings were generally linked to their owner's spirituality. But once the cultivator was killed, his belongings inside spatial rings could easily be recovered by others. Minos then decided to start checking the Protector Philip's ring because he thought it's best to leave the main course last. Here are 3,000 low-level crystals. 2 techniques of black-grade. Wow. This guy should have good contacts within the Silva family to achieve such a thing. Minos thought to himself as he searched the inside of Philip's ring. He was surprised by the presence of two techniques of black-gray because Philip was only at level 43. At this level, even having a technique of this quality could already be considered a lot for someone who was just a subordinate. Albert Stewart himself, who was a subordinate to the royal family, had only 3 techniques when he was at level 51. And a person like Philip could take a few decades to reach this level, so his situation was quite unusual. After a while, Minos also found 3 spiritual weapons in Philip's spatial ring, but they were all grade .1, medium. Level. I will give these weapons and techniques to the army of the Black Plane. It does not yet have a good variety of techniques or a good amount of weapons. Minos thought to himself. After that, he started to check Daryl's spatial ring. As expected, this Daryl Silva was really rich. He burst out laughing when he saw the ring's contents. There were 400 medium.grade crystals, 20,000 low.grade crystals, for black.grade techniques, some grade .1 spiritual pills, and 3 grade .1, high.level, spiritual weapons. The patriarch of the Silva family was really generous to his son. So, that's why he can't keep bidding. He didn't have any more medium grade crystals. Minos thought with a smile on his face. After that, he started to analyze the 4 techniques that were with the young Daryl. There was 1 specialized in cultivation, 2 in attack, and 1 in defense. How peculiar, this guy had learned 2 attack techniques, being only in the 4th stage of cultivation. Minos was surprised when he noticed this. Such a thing was not common, since at the lowest levels, learning techniques for different purposes was much safer than focusing on a single specialization. Only those cultivators who did not focus on battles, such as alchemists, used to have this type of configuration. Among the warriors, like Minos and most of the people in this world, the common thing was to have a cultivation technique, an attack technique, a defense technique, and a moving or support technique when the cultivator reached the 4th stage of cultivation. This must be because the Silva family is a militaristic force that believes only in force. That must be why. Minos thought as he snapped his fingers. After a while, he turned to the group of soldiers who were gradually recovering. He then focused on those who were most hurt and said. The young master of the Silva family had 5 spiritual pills specialized in recovery. I will give them to you since you were the ones who hurt the most. This will help you to recover more quickly. After hearing this, these 5 soldiers quickly rejoiced. Being able to use such a pill would recover most of your injuries. I'm going to give these 2 spatial rings to Sergeants Pike and Lathar. But the rest of you will be able to get your rings when the army of the Black Plane develops a little more and acquires at least an array master and a grade .2 blacksmith. It may take a while, but we will get there, Minos said confidently as he scanned each of the soldiers. After saying this, he also gave the soldiers the spiritual crystals that he had plundered from the bodies of the young Daryl's 3 protectors. There were just over 4,000 crystals, which were duly distributed among the 10 men. It didn't take long, and the waterfall at which the group was standing fell silent again while the 11 men cultivated peacefully in this place. Meanwhile, in the maritime city, a white eagle was standing outside the city. At that moment, a young woman with black hair then approached the beast and rubbed her hands on its neck. Come on, White. Now we are going to travel by sea. I want to see this stone island. They say it is a decent place near this northern region of the central continent. Ruth said softly as she stroked her huge spiritual beast. She had stopped at the maritime city to rest before finally crossing the sea. This was her first time doing this, so even though she was on a mission, she wanted to make the most of this trip. Ruth didn't like being sent to a place with a spiritual density as low as this, but since she couldn't help it, she would try to enjoy this trip to the fullest. Chapter 33. Leaving the city of Portland. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Somewhere in the capital of Stone Island, there was a large mansion with a multicolored garden. At this moment, a young woman with blonde hair and green eyes was sitting at one of the tables in this garden, having a cup of tea, calmly. I haven't gone out to do business in the Brown Kingdom for over a year. I wonder how far the Black Plain has developed. The young woman thought to herself while curling a lock of hair with one hand. This was Elon Nash, the merchant with whom Minos had made an exclusive deal. At this moment, a beautiful woman was walking towards Elon with a worried face. She had blonde hair and wore a green dress, which highlighted her sensual curves to the point of attracting even other women. Elon, I have some bad news. We lost contact with our subordinates in the Kingdom of the Waves. The beautiful woman then began to report the situation to Elon, with a serious look on her face. At the same time, in the Brown Kingdom, in the main city of the Red Valley, Otis Silva, the patriarch of the Silva family, was having a meeting with 4 other spiritual king subordinates of his family. They were in a well-lit and luxuriously decorated room. There were some high-end paintings on the walls, a large bookshelf on the left side of the room, a glass table in the center, 2 large sofas in front of each other, and an armchair at the end of the room, with its back to the balcony from the office. At that moment, one of the subordinates, who looked younger and was sitting on one of the 2 sofas, said with a serious face. Patriarch, recently has been a lot of bandit activity in the region of the border between the Kingdom of the Waves and the Black Plain. Because of this, some of our 4th-stage subordinates disappeared a few weeks ago, along with the items that were being transported. I recommend that we use a different route to get to the Kingdom of the Waves. This is at least in the short term until the situation returns to normal. The patriarch frowned and spoke unhappily. I heard about it, but I didn't think the situation would reach at this point. Won't the Kingdom of the Waves do anything about it? If this continues, our business in the kingdom will be delayed. This was an important issue for anyone who did business in the Kingdom of the Waves and was coming from the south of this kingdom. This is because, between the Kingdom of the Waves and the Brown Kingdom, a mountain range divided them until the beginning of the Black Plain. This made it considerably more difficult to travel by land in this region. And since most of the trade between the kingdoms was transported by land, passing through the Black Plain region was the way that minimized the distance between the 2 kingdoms. Because of this, many traders who came from the Brown Kingdom and some from the Cromwell Kingdom used this stretch to reach the Kingdom of the Waves. Otherwise, there would be a need to transport these resources across the sea, which would make transportation more expensive. This is because it was very difficult to obtain marine spiritual beasts. Thus, the means of maritime transport were considerably slower and more expensive than land. As for the border with the Black Plain, next to the Kingdom of the Waves, there was a place with a large presence of criminal groups. This was due to the lower spiritual density of the region, which distanced the interest of noble families in keeping those areas under control. However, this place was still considered better than the Black Plain, which is why there were not many groups of bandits in the territory of Minos. As they continued to discuss matters of the utmost importance to the Silva family, an elderly man hurriedly entered the room. This was a servant of the Silva family. "Patriarch, something terrible has happened," he said while his face was completely pale. In fact, he didn't want to have to deliver such news, but unfortunately, it happened on his shift. While the servant was sweating coldly, Otis Silva looked at him with an ugly expression on his face and asked, "Why did you come in here like that? Don't you see that I have an important meeting?" "I'm sorry, Patriarch, but this is urgent. The sign of the young master Daryl's soul has disappeared," the older man said as he lowered his head in fear. He was afraid of being killed just for delivering such news. "Ha! What did you say?" Patriarch Otis asked in disbelief. Meanwhile, 2 days went by quickly, and now Minos and his group had already returned to the city of Portland. Most of them had already recovered much of the superficial injuries and were now training behind closed doors in their rooms. Minos had also purchased several spiritual healing pills to help his subordinates recover faster. He had also contacted other alchemists and made offers to attract them to his side. However, no one showed great interest after he said that he is the sovereign of the Black Plain. After all, few would risk going to such a poor place. But Minos was not unhappy with this, as he had already expected such a thing to happen, and it would not be long before the news that his region had been recovered and now he was doing business here on the Stone Island was spread in this region. With that, Minos was confident that, even if these experts did not accept his offer now, it did not mean that they would not change their mind in the future. It seems that there is nothing else I can do here in Portland. Minos thought to himself as he ate an apple and looked at the city's landscape through the window of the room he was in. He didn't want to do a lot of business around here, as he would be heading to the Stone Island capital, Old Stone, shortly thereafter. Thus, he could buy the items necessary to develop the Black Plain in a place with better rated products and higher quantities. I will wait just one more day before we leave. It will be better to give this time for my soldiers to recover fully. Minos thought to himself before entering the spatial kingdom. I wonder how Miss Elin is doing. He spoke in a low voice as he walked to the house by the lake. He had a smile on his face as he thought of that young trader. In fact, as a young teenager of 16 years old, Minos could not help thinking of beauty as the young Elin. And with his reunion getting closer and closer, he had been thinking more and more about interacting with the young blonde. I better get rid of those thoughts and start my training. Minos thought with a sly smile on his face. After that, it was not long before Minos began to perform a series of repetitive movements besides the lake. Spatial sword. Swoosh. Swoosh. The attack technique was activated dozens of times before Minos finally stopped to rest. He was covered in sweat and had spent most of his spiritual energy on this training session. Glub. 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 He drank a jug filled with water while saying irregularly and breathing quickly. Hoo, it's getting more and more difficult to advance my sword technique. Hoo, it's really hard to have to activate it 1,000 times. After a while, Minos began to cultivate to replenish his energies. He then started his defensive training after a few hours of cultivation. Indestructible body. After activating his defensive technique dozens of times, Minos prepared to take the final blow of the session. A blade of energy was launched in the direction of Minos. Such an attack came from a grade .1, high level, spiritual array that Minos had bought in Portland in the past few days. This array emitted a blade attack equivalent to an attack by someone at level 39. Swoosh. Phew, I'm going to stop here, Minos said aloud as he sat on the floor to rest. Thus, a day quickly passed, and Minos finally decided to leave the spatial kingdom. All soldiers were fully recovered and ready to continue traveling at that time. Minos left his room and called Sergeant Pike. Is everything ready for our trip to the Old Stone City? Yes, young master. We rented 3 carriages here in Portland for the trip, and they are already at the entrance in the Olsen Hotel. Pike said calmly. Great, let's go then. We have nothing else to do in this city. Minos spoke as he walked to one of the elevators on the floor where his room was. It didn't take long, and the entire group of 11 people left Portland, heading towards the central part of Stone Island. Chapter 34. Old Stone. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye, and now, Minos and his group were only a few hours away from the capital of Stone Island, Old Stone. In those days that passed, Minos counted all the gain of the trip until the present moment and began to make his plans of how to spend his tens of thousands of crystals of low grade and also the crystals of medium grade, that he still had. By Minos accounts, he had about 400,000 low grade crystals and 500 medium grade crystals. With this amount, he intended to buy about 300 pills of grade .1, divided into 3 parts containing pills of low level, medium level, and high level. As for grade .2 pills, it would take a few years before the forces of the Black Plain Army needed such a resource, not to mention that Minos could not afford to do this now. To give you an idea, pills of this grade are sold in medium-grade crystals, as well as spiritual weapons. The same goes for arrays that are in this grade. Minos also planned to buy about 120 grade .1 spiritual weapons, divided into 3 parts, as well as with the pills. As to why he was buying low-level and medium-level weapons and pills as well, this was because he wanted to arm and increase the cultivation speed of the youths, who had joined the Black Plain Army in recent months. This is because there were not many spiritual weapons in the Black Plain, and even the ones that they had were old and defective. As for the pills, it would help 300 soldiers advance further in cultivation. With this, Minos planned to spend almost all of his low-grade crystals, leaving only the medium-grade ones, which he wanted to use to buy a grade .2, low-grade, spiritual meeting array. Such an array was 10 times more powerful than a grade .1, high-grade, array, like the ones that the Dry City had won from Merchant Elon Nash. With this grade 2 array, Minos could also cover an area of 0.1 million square meters, thus increasing the area with more dense spiritual energy within the Dry City. This spiritual array also had an efficiency of 26%, which was already much better than the ones that Minos had, which could offer an efficiency of only 20%. Minos hoped that the Black Plain would raise an entire step of strength with all these investments. He also wanted to start attracting low-level people from other impoverished regions, such as those bordering the Black Plain with the Kingdom of the Waves and the Cromwell Kingdom. After all, the current population of the Plain Black was only 50,000 inhabitants, and more than 40,000 of them already lived in the Dry City. With such numbers, it would not be long before Minos faced a problem with labor supply. In fact, according to his accounts, in a maximum of 6 months, the entire unemployed adult population of the Black Plain would already be working in agriculture or the Black Plain Army. Therefore, if he did not encourage immigration towards his territories, he could not continue to grow. This is really a problem. I have to talk to Miss Elon about this. Maybe she can help me with that. Minos thought as he watched the horizon through his carriage window. In the spiritual world, it was not uncommon for slaves and businesses specialized in the commercialization of captives to appear. But the numbers of these groups were relatively small, as there had been no major wars in this region of the central continent for a long time. Of course, there were always some conflicts between noble families and smaller families, but the scale of these events did not reach such alarming numbers that millions of slaves appeared at once. However, even if these groups were numerous, Minos would not be very interested in this type of labor. Even if someone bought slaves and then treated them well and even freed them, these former captives would never be happy. Many of them might even be grateful for the gesture, but they would still want to have their own lives, perhaps elsewhere. In fact, the number of people who would give up their newly recovered freedom to stay and help their libertarians was very small. After all, individuals who have gone through this type of situation learn to be skeptical and try to recover what they had lost through slavery. And Minos was also not in favor of this type of service. Buying a slave and then freeing him is not a way to help fight this system. On the contrary, by buying slaves, you would only be helping to strengthen this type of market. That was what Minos believed. As for helping these groups, well, Minos lacked the strength for this, and more importantly, he was not a good person to the point of giving up his own interests to help strangers. He could even do something about it, as long as it didn't harm him. Time passed, and the silhouette of the old stone city began to appear on the horizon for the group of carriages, in which Minos and his group were. It was a huge city, and despite the distance, it was from the group of Minos, they could still clearly see how big it was. According to the information that Minos had received, this was a city with more than 6 million inhabitants. This was almost twice as large as the capital of the Brown Kingdom, the city of the setting sun, which had less than 3.1 million residents. This clearly showed the financial difference between the two states. What made Stone Island one of the most influential regions near the north of the central continent, while the Brown Kingdom had an influence that was only average. However, despite the differences in influence and wealth of any party, the powers in these states were considered equivalent. Not only that, while Stone Island had many of its non-warrior specialists, the Brown Kingdom had many warriors and few support professionals. This also explained the relative peace between the region's top powers. They had equivalent powers and needed each other to continue their affairs. Some more time passed, and the group of Minas arrived at the southeast entrance of the old stone city. Many other carriages were coming and going through this entrance to the city, with several spiritual beasts pulling the many carriages. It was possible to see many third and fourth rank beasts and even some fifth. It was really an image that Minas had not seen even when he lived in the city of the setting sun. After all, even if there were beasts of that level in his old city where he lived, it was not common to see them on the streets. As Minas' carriage drove slowly through the streets of the old stone town, he could see many multi-story buildings in different locations. Not only that, the city had uneven and mountainous terrain, which made some of these buildings stand out even more. Such a look would make one think of the beautiful landscape that could be seen from these places. At that moment, Sergeant Pike, who was standing next to Minas, said in a low voice with a thoughtful expression, "The spiritual energy here is much denser than in the city of Portland." Amazing. When he heard that, Minas smiled and said with a smile on his face, "This is normal since in this city there must be some array masters of grade .2. With that, the city certainly has many spiritual meeting arrays in operation. We are going to look for the Hotel Olsen, here in the old stone city. Ask someone for directions," Minas said to Sergeant Pike as he enjoyed the view of the city. Pike then got out of the carriage and looked for directions from the Hotel Olsen, which was here in the capital of Stone Island. It didn't take long, and the group of Minas arrived at the hotel and checked in. The night was starting when they settled into their rooms. Minas then thought to himself, "I will leave to look for Miss Elin tomorrow." He threw himself on his bed after taking a nice hot shower. Even though I don't need to sleep as much as before, I still love doing it." While Minas was sleeping peacefully at the Olsen Hotel in the old stone city, a giant eagle, which was in the fourth stage, was approaching the capital of Stone Island. This was an eagle with completely white feathers and a large yellow beak. On top of this huge beast, a young girl with a cute appearance and a bored look on her face. This was Ruth Miles, the young disciple of Minas' mother. She had traveled quickly from the maritime city to Portland and then came straight here. And despite having stopped to visit some places, she had still arrived here quickly, since her spiritual beast was a fourth stage and one of the flying type, which was faster than terrestrial beasts. I hope that ungrateful Minas has already arrived here. Otherwise, I will be forced to wait for him. Ruth thought as she yawned slowly. White, let's start going down. I want to find a place for me to rest in this city. She spoke as she rubbed her hands around the eagle's large neck. Chapter 35. Mismatch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As she arrived in the city, Ruth heard a warning from one of the guards who was patrolling the city's surroundings. "Miss, spiritual beasts like your eagle are allocated at the western entrance to the city. There, you can rent an area for your beast to rest." After that, Ruth passed the city to the specific location on the west side of the old stone, which was a place where city visitors could leave their greatest spiritual beasts. This is because in the capital of Stone Island, it was not allowed to fly around the city with beasts, and as for terrestrial beasts, they were limited to a certain size. And since White was a flying beast, it wouldn't be very useful in the city, so Ruth planned to leave her beast there. After a while, Ruth left White and went into the city. This place is actually a decent size. I think that walking around here until I find a hotel would be problematic. After thinking about it, Ruth decided to rent a carriage at a location near the western entrance to the city. "Good evening, miss. Where do you want to go?" asked the coachman with a sympathetic expression. Then Ruth replied with an indifferent look on her face. "Good night. I don't know the old stone city, so just take me to the best hotel here." Oh. So, this is your first time here. In this case, I will take you to the Hotel Olsen. I can't say if it is the best in town, but it definitely won't displease you. Ruth shook her head and said. MNN, Hotel Olsen then. Soon after, the carriage began to move towards the central part of the city, where the hotel was located. Ruth then began to observe the parts where they passed. This was a good city. Despite having a much lower spiritual concentration than large cities located in the Flaming Empire, it was still a good place for less talented cultivators to live. Ruth thought about it as she crossed the city. She could see many buildings on the horizon, and because the city was mountainous, she could even see places that were very far away, which could give you a feeling that you were in a real jungle of buildings. As for the streets, they had ample space for the passage of up to 4 carriages at the same time, and there was also great afforestation, which left a good impression on anyone who saw it for the first time. This place is fascinating. It seems to be as big as the capital of the Cromwell Kingdom. She thought to herself as she assessed this place. It didn't take long before the carriage arrived at the Hotel Olsen in the old stone town. This was a building that, to anyone looking, would appear to be covered entirely in glass. It had about 10 floors, with a garden rich in spiritual plants of different types. Looking at the building in front of her, Ruth could see several lights from different floors. She then walked into the building and soon went to check that in. She was tired and wanted to take a good shower, then go out to eat. After passing a group of 4 men who were leaving the hotel, she entered the building. Ruth then looked in the direction of the men and thought to herself. MNN, have I seen them somewhere? Ah, never mind, I'm all sticky. I want to take my shower soon. A few minutes before, Minos had just woken up and was planning to go out to dinner. Although he stopped to sleep, it was only for 3 hours, enough for him to rest at his current level. After he woke up, Minos decided to find a place to have dinner. After all, although he slept for a few hours, there was still a lot of movement on the street at this moment, so he could choose a good place to eat. Sergeant Pike, bring 2 other soldiers to accompany me, Minos spoke shortly after leaving his room and seeing Pike sitting on a chair in the living room. Okay, young master. After a few minutes, the 4 men came down from the apartment that Minos had rented at the Hotel Olsen, heading towards a restaurant not far from where they were. As they left the hotel, the group passed a young woman with provocative curves and a delicate face. She was wearing a beautiful green dress and had a distant look on her face. When he saw this, Pike thought to himself with a doubtful expression on his face. Did I ever see this young woman somewhere? However, Sergeant Pike did not care much about it. If it were someone important to him and the Black Plane, then he would not be in doubt. In this case, it wouldn't make a difference not to recognize her. Minos and his group then headed for a restaurant called the Barbecue Temple. This was a location that Hotel Olsen indicated to their customers, who were visiting Old Stone City for the first time. After some time walking through the beautiful city, Minos arrived at the restaurant, the Barbecue Temple. This was a place with a design quite different from what you could see in this city. It was a large temple with many columns at least 15 meters high, while it had a triangular roof. There was a large red sign with the restaurant's name on the outside of the building, while a smaller building could be seen below the structure made with the large columns. Minos and his group walked slowly, seeing the magnificent beauty of this building. Shortly after, they stopped in front of a young attendant, who directed them to a specific area. The restaurant was subdivided into several parts inside the building, with tables of different sizes and fixed benches around the tables. It was a delightful setup for most people who came in groups of different sizes. It didn't take long, and a few dishes with appetizers arrived at Minos' table while his meal was being prepared. There were portions of second-stage spiritual beast wings, breaded with spicy seasoning, served with crispy celery, and a portion with a giant golden onion, accompanied by the sauce. After experimenting, Minos and the 3 men who had been invited to eat enjoyed the peppery flavor of the wings, which warmed the body while enjoying the portion of crunchy onions. Crunch. MNN, the amount of spiritual energy in these onions is not so bad, Minas said while comparing this appetizer with the products planted in his territory. It is true, but despite the loss of spiritual energy for the products from the Black Plain, the taste is really incredible. Worthy of a city as developed like this. After that, it wasn't long before the main meal arrived at Minas' table. It was a large rib of a second-stage spiritual beast, covered with a barbecue sauce, with a portion of rice prepared with almonds, champignons, chives, and red peppers. There was also a portion of vegetables with grilled pumpkin, carrots, broccoli, and peas. And to top it off, there were 4 large mugs with a golden draft beer. It didn't take long for the group to get lost in the rich aroma of the food and the distinct taste of each dish. Chomp. Knock. Knack. Neck. Minas' group devoured the food as soon as it arrived, and it wasn't long before they finished. Ah, the food here is delicious. I almost feel like kidnapping the cooks and taking them to the Black Plain, Minas thought to himself as he had the corners of his lips pointed up. After a while, the 4 men decided to return to the hotel when they were delighted. As they walked back to the Olsen Hotel, Minas thought. Ah. Now that I've rested and eaten, when we get to the hotel, I'll go straight to the Spatial Kingdom. Not long after Minas and his group left the restaurant, the barbecue temple, a sensual young woman with black hair was entering that fateful place. As she followed the young attendant into the restaurant, Ruth thought to herself. After trying the food in this place, I'll get some sleep, and then I'll cultivate until dawn. Tomorrow morning I'll go to that Nash family to see if I can find Minas. Time passed quickly, and the night gave way to the rays of dawn light, and not long afterward, Minas and the beautiful Ruth would head towards the Nash family headquarters on the Stone Island, which was on the southwest side of the old stone town. Chapter 36. Unexpected Encounter. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Dawn passed quickly, and Minas had already prepared to leave and go to meet the merchant, Elon Nash. He wanted to start doing business with Stone Island as soon as possible, opening doors for even greater growth of his forces on the Black Plain. After leaving his room, Minas had breakfast in the living room of the apartment while talking to some soldiers. Some of them were at a table full of dishes, with spiritual fruits, bread, cold cuts, and some morning drinks. The rest were standing while talking to each other. At that moment, Minas spoke seriously. Sergeant Pike and 3 others of you will come with me while the rest can stay and train. After that, it wasn't long before Minas' group left to head towards the Nash family headquarters. However, when they passed through the corridor where their apartment was to go to the elevator, an unexpected encounter happened. Ah, this place is not a bad place to sleep. Ruth thought to herself as she yawned. She had just woken up and was getting ready to leave when she saw a table full of delicacies in her apartment. Oh! Breakfast has already been delivered to my apartment. They are really efficient. She murmured in a low voice, smelling the great smell that came from the table with the breakfast she had ordered earlier. She then looked at the plates with several fruits, sandwiches, and 2 jugs of orange juice. After that, she started to eat happily while judging each item's spirituality. Chomp. Knock. Knack. Neck. MNN, it tastes excellent, but the amount of spiritual energy that is in most foods here is average at best. Ruth thought, finishing eating an apple, which was completely red. And in fact, when compared to items sold in the Flaming Empire, the spirituality contained in these foods marketed in the northern region of the central continent was actually poorer. That's because the Flaming Empire was a territory that had several regions with high spiritual concentration. In this way, the cultures planted in these territories were necessarily richer in spiritual energy. As for food of animal origin, they were also left behind since there were animals of a higher level in places with greater spiritual density. As for these animals in question, they are variations of spiritual beasts in this world. Like humans, there are spiritual beasts with different talents, but no one categorizes this distinction as a talent. This is a classification for humans and elves. For beasts, they are said to have different lineages. And how many lineages could be more or less strong, depending on two things: the race of the beast and the purity of the lineage. This means that even the purest of horses could not yet be compared to a dragon with an impure lineage. Because of this, spiritual beasts of weaker races, who could not go far in cultivation, were generally referred to as simply animals in the spiritual world. This is because these beasts were limited to a stage of cultivation, which they would not have developed their intelligence yet. To give you an idea, for spiritual beasts to reach the intelligence of a human, this was something that happened as soon as they reached the 5th stage of cultivation, which was equivalent to a human being able to feel and use the power of heaven and earth, in the same stage. For a human who has reached level 70, he can live temporarily in the form of a soul and possess another person's body or even build a new body. As for the spiritual beasts, in this same stage, they would be able to take a humanoid form and even had the ability to conceive children with humans. Anyway, spiritual beasts that were limited by their race to level 39, the limit of the 4th stage, can be called animals in this world. After a while, Ruth finished her meal and headed for the elevator on the floor where she was staying. However, at that moment, a group of 5 men was coming towards the same elevator. When Ruth finally started to think about where she had seen these people from, Minus slowly stepped out from behind one of the soldiers and became visible to the sexy curvy girl in front of the elevator. "Ah, I found you, Minus," she said, satisfied. It would make her job easier. Now she just had to take this young man to the Cromwell Kingdom, she thought. At that point, Minus, who had been surprised to be recognized by someone in this place, finally began to assess the young woman in front of him. She had a delicate face, which showed that she was not much older than him and had well-defined curves, which would make any man stop to appreciate them for a few moments. She was truly a beauty in 100,000. As he assessed the beauty of black hair in front of him, Minus thought to himself while he had an expressionless face. Where do I know this girl from? There should be no way for me to forget someone like that. He then said. Have we met before? Don't you remember? You are really the worst for not being able to recognize someone you met a little over a year ago. Ruth said with a tone of displeasure. Just over a year. At that moment, Pike stepped forward and spoke to Minus. Young master, I think this young lady was accompanying Mrs. Maisie for just over a year. Ah. So, it's you. Why are you looking for me? I didn't already say that I have no interest in yours, Grey Cloud sect. Ruth then said with a smirk on her face. Humph, you're an ungrateful person who doesn't know what you're missing. If it weren't for my master, you would never be able to join our sect. But today, I'm here to tell you about the spiritual tournament, which will take place in a few months in the Cromwell Kingdom. My master told me to come here and tell you about it, and if you were already at least in the 4th stage of cultivation. At that moment she stopped talking because, due to the surprise of meeting Minus at the same hotel where she was staying, Ruth had forgotten to probe Minus' strength. What? How can that be possible? She said as she looked at Minus in shock. That's because she realized that he was already in the 4th stage of cultivation, at level 33. This was unbelievable for her because in just over a year, this young man outside level 0 to level 33. Due to his previous cultivation speed, she already expected him to reach the 4th stage of cultivation before the spiritual tournament. However, he was already at this level now, and it was still months before this competition started. So, she was surprised. To give you an idea, people with silver talent, like the young Ruth, took an average of almost 3 years to achieve this. As for those with black talent, most of them took an average of 4 years to reach this stage. What a monster this Minus is. Did the master make a mistake in saying that he had black talent? Such speed is very unbelievable for someone with black talent. Ruth thought to herself. Meanwhile, Minus held his hands behind his back while he smiled. He had a good idea of why she had been so surprised all of a sudden. So, he had decided to let her take a breath and recover from the shock before continuing their conversation. "Let's talk inside my apartment," Minas said as he headed back to the room from which he had left earlier. After that, he went to his room and settled in an armchair that was there. A few seconds later, Minas finally broke the silence and asked in a curious tone. "What is this spiritual tournament? And why does my mother want me to participate?" Ruth then regained her composure and responded sincerely. "The spiritual tournament is a competition made by the sects of the Flaming Empire, in the northern region of the Central Continent. Once every 8 years, this tournament is held in one of the kingdoms of this region, in which the objective is to bring the greatest talents to our empire. This is also a great opportunity for the geniuses of this region. The first 3 places receive generous rewards, while the first place also gains a silver grade technique. This is also a good chance for the geniuses in this region to get to know each other. That's because even though most of them don't have the talent to go to other parts of the Central Continent, many of them will still rule important families, sometimes even becoming kings of their kingdoms. Therefore, the spiritual tournament is considered one of the events of great importance for the region in which you are. As for why my master wants you to participate, it must be so that you know how big the world can be." She finished with a smile on her face. Interesting. Even if I don't need this technique, I will still be a leader in this region of the Central Continent, and that is why I must meet the future specialists here. This is also a good opportunity for me to fight those of the same generation as me. Minas thought to himself as he cracked his fingers with a thoughtful expression on his face. Chapter 37. Information. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As for this opportunity to join one of the Flaming Empire sects, I have no interest in that. If I could get such a sect as my ally, it would be great, but getting something like that, at this moment, would be impossible. In this case, I will not try to interact with any power outside the northern region of the Central Continent. Minas was right. If he joined one of the Flaming Empire sects, he would be just an external member of those forces. That's because the sects that organized the spiritual tournament were all powers with dozens of spiritual emperors and even had spiritual saints leading them. So, if the young Stuart joined one of these sects, it would take him many years to achieve sufficient status so that the doors could be opened for Minas to do his business in that empire. Minas also had no way of providing services to such a distant place. Hell, he was barely starting to bring his business out of the Black Plain. While Minas was seriously thinking, Ruth waited for his response with a satisfied expression on her delicate face. He must be very tempted by the silver grade technique. Ruth thought to herself. After a while, she finally broke the silence and said. "And then? You want to participate, right?" Minas finished his conjectures and looked at the beautiful lady in front of him. He smiled and said. "Yes, I am interested in this tournament. It can help me a lot." I knew you were going to say this. After all, a silver grade technique is very valuable. Really? Minas vaguely agreed while having the tips of his lips slightly pointed upwards. "Okay, since you've already decided, we'd better go to the Cromwell Kingdom right away," Ruth said as she got up from the couch she was sitting on. "No, I have other matters to attend to before we go." "Another matter? What can be more important than this?" "Just so you know, even on my 4th stage spiritual beast, it takes at least 3 weeks to reach the capital of the Cromwell Kingdom, departing from here, from the Stone Island." Minas then asked. "And how much time is left for this competition to happen?" "In 6 months from now." "Ah. So, we have enough time." "The way you said it, I thought it was already close." Minas said with a satisfied look. "I know there is enough time, but it would be better if we went there soon. Many of the spiritual tournament participants arrive at the competition site up to 4 months before the scheduled date. That's because, in doing so, they can better understand the situation they are in. Many of these participants achieve good results in their final training because of the pressure imposed by themselves when meeting other high-level geniuses. Ruth looked at Minos with a disapproving look after saying this. She thought he was underestimating the opponents of this important competition by leaving to go to the competition site later. After all, even if he had an insane speed in cultivation, that didn't mean he would be the strongest participant in this event. I must warn you that, although your cultivation speed is very good, if we consider what happened in the previous tournaments, a cultivator from the beginning of the 4th stage like you can only be considered on average. The strongest in this competition has always been at the beginning of the 5th stage. Since there is always one or other competing that has already reached level 42, or even a little stronger than that. After all, even though the northern region of the central continent is considerably poorer in spiritual energy compared to other parts of our continent, having a few individuals with above-average talent is something you see quite often when you look at such a large population. This was really true. Even though it was difficult to happen, people with talent greater than their parents were not so difficult to find. This can be seen clearly in the examples of Lee and Allison, who Minos had brought to his side. Ruth then stared into the young man's eyes in front of her and said, "That's why you shouldn't underestimate the spiritual tournament. You don't know that, but some of the great specialists from the Flaming Empire came from here, from this region. Even some small families from here, on the north of the central continent, have completely changed after having a single member going to our empire. To give you an idea, almost 20 years ago, in the tournament of that time, one of the families of your Brown Kingdom had one of its members with silver talent, who participated in that competition. They hid this young man wisely, and in the end, that person won the spiritual tournament and went to one of the Flaming Empire sections. After that, he grew considerably and gained an important position in the sect he went to, having even reached the stage of spiritual emperor under 40s. After that, it wasn't long before his whole family left the Brown Kingdom to move to a region of high spiritual concentration, which that young man had obtained as a reward for becoming an elder of the sect he was in. My master told me this story a few years ago when I found out about this competition. If I'm not mistaken, that expert in question is called Dennis Red." Ruth finished speaking while watching Minos. "Oh. So, that's why the Red family left the Red Valley in the Brown Kingdom. But don't worry about it. I'm not underestimating this competition," Minos said with a confident tone. He really did not think of himself as an invincible being who acted hastily without making the proper plans. But his priority was the Black Plain. After all, making contacts was important, but if he neglected his responsibilities as sovereign, then having such contacts would only hinder the development of Minos' forces. And Minos understood very well what he could and could not do, so he would never pay more attention to something secondary than his main objective. "Humph, you don't know what you're talking about. But that's okay, hee, you're the one who will go down in the end." Ruth thought to herself, as she imagined a future in which Minos would leave this pose and tell her how wrong he was. "So, why do you want to stay here any longer?" "I have a lot of things to do here. I have to buy weapons and spiritual pills for my organization. I also have a business to do with the Stone Island," Minos said sincerely. "Ah, business. Regardless of what it is, you could do it all in the Cromwell Kingdom instead of doing it here," Ruth said with a disapproving expression on her face. For her, Minos was doing many things that only made matters difficult for himself. Minos then shook his head and said, "It is not that simple. You don't understand my situation to know where it is better or worse to do my business. Believe me. The Stone Island is the best place of all for the Black Plain to start negotiating." "Humph, if you say so, then I won't say anything anymore." Ruth then asked. "So, you came to see this Elin Nash for this?" "That's right. I made a commercial agreement with her. Anyway, since you've said it all, it's time for me to look for her. Will you come with me?" he asked after getting up from his chair with a smile on his face. As my teacher gave me the mission to accompany you to the spiritual tournament, then I will accompany you for that period since it is not worth it for me to return now. She said with a little reluctance in her eyes. Ruth did not like to stay in a place with a spiritual density as low as the north of the central continent, but she could not return to her sect during this period. The spiritual tournament was only 6 months away, and just for her to go back and forth between the Flaming Empire and this region, it would take more than 3 months. Because of this, it was not worth it for her to try to return to her sect while Minos resolved his final issues. Since this is the case, let's get going. I want to find Miss Elin as soon as possible. After saying this, Minos and Ruth left the room that they were in and headed for the exit of the hotel. The 3 former guards and Sergeant Pike also accompanied them. They drove in a carriage from the central part of the old stone town, where the Hotel Olsen was located, to the west of the city, where the Nash family headquarters was located on Stone Island. I hope Miss Elin is there. Otherwise, it could slow me down a bit. Minos thought to himself as he watched the view of this beautiful city as his carriage wandered the streets. Chapter 38. Coming to the Nash family. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Minos, Ruth, and the soldiers began to stroll the beautiful streets of the capital of Stone Island, while they went to the western part of the old stone city, where the headquarters of the Nash family was located. Minos' carriage quickly reached the doors of a grand palace, which stood at the entrance to one of the many mountains in this city, making its front completely visible to anyone coming from the street. This palace was as big as the one of the Brown Kingdom royal family, and from the external look, it could be said to be even more valuable. In it, you could see dozens of windows spread over 4 floors, the first 2 floors being the same size and the next 2 were smaller than the other, like a staircase. Other than that, one could see a large garden in front of the palace, with many spiritual plants of different colors and a beautiful fountain in the middle of the garden. Outside this property, there was a large wall that surrounded the entire inner region, and there was a beautiful, completely green gate with a silver ship symbol in the middle. This was the hallmark of the Nash family. Incredible, this Nash family must be really rich. Perhaps only the Miller family of the Brown Kingdom can compare to them. Minos thought to himself as he saw the beautiful Nash family palace in front of him. The Miller family in question was a major economic influence in the Brown Kingdom, being one of the 2 great noble families in the kingdom, excluding the royal family. This family was responsible for most of the business related to the marketing of products made by array masters and alchemists within the Brown Kingdom. They also had a hand in the spiritual weapons business, but they lost to the royal family in this regard. They also have deep relations with the Kingdom of the Waves, which is the largest kingdom in the northern region of the central continent. Standing there. This is the Nash family's property. What do you intend to do here? Said a tall man dressed in great silver armor, with a long war hammer on his back. Minos just replied with a gentle smile on his face and said, "Hello, friend of the Nash family, my name is Minos Stewart. I made a commercial partnership with Miss Elin some time ago, and I am here to deal with this matter." The man gave Minos a strange look and then said, "Wait next to the gate while I confirm if Miss Elin will receive you." "Humph, I hope that's right. It wouldn't be the first time that any suitor of Miss Elin pretends to be a business partner to try to see her. If that is the case, the young master will not be happy to know about it. This young man had better be careful." The guard thought to himself as he headed towards a building next to the entrance gate. After a while, the man sent a servant to warn the young Elin about the unexpected visit of this alleged business partner, named Minos Stewart. In one part of the palace, Elin Nash was in a room in her apartment while drinking spiritual tea with a friend and business partner. "Elin, we better send some guards to find out what happened on the border between the Kingdom of the Waves and the Black Plain." "You don't have to go there just for that," said a beautiful young woman with blonde hair and sensual curves. "No, I will go myself. With that, I can take the opportunity to see how much the Black Plain has improved in the meantime. Even if it is not yet time to start negotiating, it is good to monitor the development of that place closely." Elin said, looking at the beautiful young woman in front of her. She was Elena Neal, a friend, and business partner of Elin, for some years. She was also the daughter of one of the great noble families on Stone Island, the Neal family. Ah. So, you want to know about it. But I don't think this black plane is so worth it, so you have to worry about going there. Even if they manage to plant in that dead soil there, I doubt that the crops are better than those of the Cromwell Kingdom, considering how weak the spiritual energy of that region is. Elena said with an expression of displeasure on her face. Well, it really is not a simple thing to start planting in a place with a spiritual density as low as the Black Plain, but this is being done by the same person who made this planting possible. No one has achieved such a feat before him. That's why I'm giving him this chance. Elin said with a serious expression on her face. Elena nodded and said quietly. That's true. Soon after, a servant who had just entered the room went to Elin and said. Miss Elin, a man named Minas Stewart says that he is here to speak with you. What do we say to him? When she heard this name, Elin's pupils contracted, and she smiled slightly. Oh. What a coincidence that he came here when we were talking about him. Okay, Halia, bring him over here. After that, the servant named Halia left quickly and headed for the Nash family palace gate, where Minas was waiting for authorization to enter the property. Hee, I didn't expect to meet this young man today. I want to see what someone who did a miracle looks like. Haha. Elena said with a curious smile on her face. You said that his cultivation was very weak, right? MNN, it's true, but it's not that simple. I ordered a survey of his past to Edouard, and from what I heard, he almost died when he was 9 years old. He only recovered just over a year ago, just before I met him. Oh, so he went through such a tragedy. What a pity for him. If he were stronger, maybe he could meet his older sister here. Said Elena with an ambiguous expression on her face. Stop it. You are too shameless. Elin said with a flushed face. In fact, in the spiritual world, sexuality was quite liberal, and it is quite common for people to have casual relationships and even have a sex friend. It was quite common for people to have a certain amount of experience before getting married. Of course, some people tried to maintain their chastity for someone special, but not everyone thought so or was unwilling to wait that long until someone suitable appeared. Sometime later, the young Ruth was watching the view of the palace, while Minas was sitting next to her without many expressions. It was not long before, the servant who had gone out to speak to young Elin returned. Miss Elin said that I must take the guests to her residence. The guard heard this and went to Minas's carriage with a strange look on his face. Okay, Miss Elin is going to see you now. Just follow Halia to Miss Elin's residence. After the guard said that, the big gate opened, allowing the group of Minas to pass inside the property. They stopped in a large open space, where other carriages stood with their respective spiritual beasts. After that, Minas, Ruth, and the soldiers who accompanied them followed the servant Halia towards the palace's interior. Elin Nash's apartment was not far. On the south side of the building, it was on the second floor. On the way, Minas and his group passed by some large halls and offices while observing the beautiful decoration of the place. There were several pictures and sculptures through the building's corridors, which would make anyone stop for a second to admire them before going about their business. There were also some spiritual plants, which were used for decorations, present in the places where the group passed. It wasn't long before the group finally arrived at Elin's residence. At first glance, it looked more like one of the many rooms they passed, but the servant made sure to explain to them how good this part of the building was. According to Halia, the Nash spiritual meeting array was on the south side of the complex, making this part more valuable. Of course, the entire building was affected by the array, but the regions closest to it had a much greater amount of energy than other parts. When the servant was asked why Miss Elin received such treatment, Halia said that the young Elin is the only daughter of the supreme elder of the Nash family, who lost in strength and influence only to the family patriarch. In this way, Elin had great importance within the family, which is why she had received such residency. Oh. So, she is the daughter of the Supreme Elder. Minos thought to himself. Shortly thereafter, Minos and his group entered Elin Nash's residence and saw two beautiful youths, blonde women sitting on a sofa while they talked and drank spiritual tea. Chapter 39. Business on the Stone Island. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. One of these two beauties Minos already knew was his commercial ally within Stone Island, Elin Nash. But the other was a beauty that Minos did not know. She had an unrivaled appearance and a breathtaking body from anyone looking at her. At that moment, Elin received him and said with a smile on her face. "It is good to see you again, Mr. Minos. Let me introduce you. This is my business partner and friend, Elena Neal." Elena then greeted him and said. "Oh. So, you are the young Minos that Elin talks about so much." Minos replied politely. "MNN, nice to meet you." Soon after, Elena tried to check the strength of her friend's commercial ally. At first glance, he didn't seem as weak as Elin had said to her. Level 33. This is not weak for someone at his age. Was Elin kidding me? Elena thought to herself, after being surprised. Wait a minute. Didn't he just start cultivating a year ago? What kind of monster is he? She thought while she was more and more shocked by this speed of cultivation. At that moment, she asked Elin in a low voice. "Are you sure about the information about this? Look at his current strength. It doesn't look like anything you said to me." "Of course I do. Edward researched this himself," Elin said in a low voice to her friend. Soon afterward, she felt the difference in Minos' strength in the meantime that they didn't see each other. Unbelievable, level 33, how did he do this? In the meantime, Minos and Ruth had already settled into the room while the soldiers stood outside waiting. Elin then said with a surprised face. "Mr. Minos, you have incredible speed in cultivation. I've never seen anyone this fast before." Minos then pretended he didn't care and started talking. "MNN, I want to introduce you to Ruth. Although she is not an ally of mine, she will accompany me for a while, due to certain reasons." Minos continued after the three young women said some polite words to each other. "Miss Elin must already know the reason for my visit today. I want to start trading my cultures on Stone Island, starting in the next 3 months. Oh. That was a lot faster than I thought. But how much are we talking about? Considering the time since the plantation started in the Black Plain, there should not be a big harvest." Elin said, looking seriously at Minos. "MNN, it's true. At the moment, we are only able to plant 100 hectares. As for the numbers, at this point, we can only supply 200 tons, divided into grains, cereals, and spiritual fruits, all that with a high spiritual concentration." "What? Cultures with high spiritual concentration, are you kidding?" At that moment, Elena jumped up from the sofa and asked with an incredulous expression. This was reasonable since cultures with a high spiritual concentration were planted only in those territories with a high spiritual density. And the Black Plain was not like that. In fact, no place in the north of the central continent had such spiritual density. Elin was also shocked by what she had just heard from Minos. That would be unbelievable. But if it were true, she would become one of the few people on Stone Island who could provide this type of item. The quantity that Minos had said was also not small. This is because cultures with a high spiritual concentration were imported from other regions of the central continent, so there was not a great offer in the square. As for Ruth, who was sitting calmly in an armchair while watching the situation, she was also impressed. Although she saw many crops being planted in the Black Plain, she was not curious to probe the spiritual quality of these plants. Therefore, she was surprised by Minos' statement about this fact. Elin then asked Minos with a twinkle in her eyes. "Mr. Minos, is this really true? I don't want to doubt you, but what you said is very unbelievable for anyone who hears it within our region. MNN, I understand. But rest assured, I wasn't kidding when I said that. But I have an order for you. I do not want my items to be sold much higher than the price charged for crops with medium concentration, as must be the case for those items that are imported from other regions. I have my own reasons for this, but I want you to know that I want to sell my items to ordinary people too, not just the wealthiest families. Okay, as the Black Plain is not as far away as the other regions, from where the Stone Island normally imports these resources, the price charged for its items would already be lower anyway. But can you tell me why you demand that? You could earn more if it were sold at a higher cost. Elon asked curiously. Minos then replied with an expressionless face. In fact, my region suffers from a severe lack of labor. This is one of the most urgent problems at the moment. If there is no population increase soon, then within a maximum of 6 months, I will no longer be able to increase our production. So, this is a way to attract some less talented people to my region. Elin closed her eyes and thought to herself. In fact, with such a low spiritual density, the population of the Black Plain has hardly grown in a long time. Elena then remembered something and said with a smile on her face. Perhaps I know of a quick way to help you increase the population of your territory. In addition to the Black Plain region in the Brown Kingdom, there are 2 small territories in the Kingdom of the Waves and in the Cromwell Kingdom, specifically on the border with the Black Plain. These 2 territories are also very weak in spiritual energy because of their proximity to the Black Plain, so their populations are also weaker. With that, you can try to attract them to your territory by hiring some people from those places. After a while, they migrated naturally, as their territories do not offer as many opportunities with the current Black Plain. She took a breath for a second and then continued to speak. I recommend that you start with the territory within the Kingdom of the Waves. There is strong criminal activity in it, so the inhabitants of that place would certainly be willing to leave. You would just have to eliminate these criminal groups, and many people would start to emigrate to other regions. If you know how to attract them, then they can go to the Black Plain. Oh. So, are there these places close by? As the Dry City hardly interacts with other regions, I did not receive such information. Minos thought to himself when his lips slowly curved upwards. Thought this was great for him. If it was as Elena said, he could attract these people to the Black Plain without drawing much attention from the powers in the region. That's because if these places were only a little better than the Black Plain, then the biggest families in their respective kingdoms definitely didn't care about those places, just as they did in the Brown Kingdom. Hell, the plight of the Black Plain was so bad within the Brown Kingdom that the big families and even the royal family went years without getting any information from that place. In fact, Minos did not know, but the last time King Brown sought to know anything about the Black Plain was more than 7 years ago when the territory was allocated to Minos, after the death of Albert Stewart. Elin then gave Minos another offer. I know this information is tempting to you, but you will still have to face these groups of outlaws to achieve this. However, I can help attract people to the Dry City from other regions within the north of the central continent. Okay, facing these bandits can be a good military exercise for my army. As for your suggestion, this also interests me. I doubt that these 2 territories will be able to suppress my demand for labor for a long time. Minos replied with a smile on his face. He then remembered something and said. Okay, we also can't use the port of the maritime city to transport my cultures. Elin frowned and asked in confusion. Why not? And where are we going to transport your items from? Minos smiled and said. I am going to build a port somewhere else on the Black Plain coast. As to why, well, I don't want the great forces of the Brown Kingdom to know about the development of my territory. Hearing this, Elena frowned when she thought about the consequences of Minos' actions. She then asked in a serious voice. Are you thinking of rebelling? When she said that, Elin was scared, such as Ruth. They could not believe that Minos had such ambitions. Does he want to create his own kingdom? The two thought to themselves.